My name is Elise Wild, and you are listening to Women's Lifestyle magazine, Inspired Voices. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Inspired Voices. I hope you're doing well, I hope you're safe and healthy and happy, and I hope your loved ones are too. We are experiencing the easing of coronavirus restrictions in Michigan, and while we are so freaking excited to see our business community get up and running and able to open their doors and serve their customers, we really encourage everybody to continue to practice the safety measures as outlined by the CDC. Wear your mask, social distance, so that we can continue to see a downturn in the virus. It's been a couple weeks since we released an episode. There have been quite a few major events that have occurred in our community since then. We are one of many communities across the nation that have mourned the death and continue to mourn the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and there have been some very moving demonstrations taking place right here in our community as people come together and rise up and use their voices to demand change and bring attention to systemic racism. It's my hope that this is more than just a moment. It's my hope that this is something that truly impacts the way that we rebuild our world as we reopen from coronavirus and as we continue to rebuild systems, that they are truly more equitable and that we dismantle those that have been put in place that target specific community members and victimize them. And we will be having some guests on later this month to talk about those issues. Today, we have with us Rachel Gleason, who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community here in Grand Rapids. Rachel is pretty visible in our community. She is the Director of Education and a teaching artist with the Diatribe, which is a collective of spoken word artists who provide education and a platform for students across West Michigan. They go into schools and they teach them spoken word, and they provide them an outlet through various performances throughout the year to perform the spoken word that they've written through the Diatribe programming. It's amazing. They're in 20 to 30 schools a year, and as you will hear Rachel describe, they've had some pretty incredible moments with students expressing what appears to be pretty complex issues for their age. Rachel was also gracious enough to share with us her experience coming out in West Michigan, coming from a very stringent religious church community, and what that experience is like, and what it continues to be like in the LGBTQ community, and what her hopes are for the future of that community here in Grand Rapids as the city continues to develop. And I've said this a few times on this podcast, Grand Rapids has enjoyed some pretty incredible development over the past few years. I grew up here. I remember when downtown was really not that much except for Van Andel Arena, Cottage Bar, and Civic Theater. And now it's just become quite a city to live in and to experience, but not all of our neighborhoods and our community members benefit from that development. So that's something that Rachel and I touch on, and we talk about Pride Month and how this month is clearly very different, whereas the nation's, rightfully so, the nation's attention is on Black Lives Matter and on the recent deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and advocating for swift policy change within policing. And Rachel describes kind of what it's like to just graciously step aside and shine the spotlight on the people of color within the LGBTQ plus community, and let this be a Pride Month that draws attention to intersectionality rather than one that is all about celebration, celebration, celebration. And I was really grateful to Rachel for coming on. She's so articulate and well-spoken, and well, as she should be. She's a spoken word artist, but she came on and shared some pretty incredible things about her life experience, and I was really moved by it, and I learned from it, and I hope that you are too. So here we go. Thanks for listening. All right, welcome back to another episode of Inspired Voices. My name is Elise Wild. I'm the editor of Women's Lifestyle magazine and the host of this podcast. I am really excited today because we have a pretty amazing person in our community who's been doing great work here for a long time, Rachel Gleason. Rachel, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. Rachel is the co-founder of a spoken word group called the Diatribe. I'm sure I just kind of butchered that description, but Rachel, I'm going to let you describe to us what the Diatribe is and how long you guys have been working in the community here.
The Diatribe is a non-profit organization. We work to empower young people to share their stories, talk about social justice issues, and create change in their communities. And we do that through poetry and spoken word. The group itself formed in 2013. It was a group of 7 young men that were passionate about poetry and spoken word and hip hop. They formed a collective in order to support one another's work and artistic careers. And they entered Art Prize with the first ever blind, deaf friendly Art Prize exhibit.
Wow.
So they had all of the work done in Braille. They had videos with closed captioning. They were out performing and losing their voices every day in different locations. And a lot of teachers came through with students. So a teacher, Rick Jackson, from 54th Street Academy, came through. I think originally it was their Rocket Learning Lab as part of Kellogg'sville High School came through. It was an alternative ed program that now is 54th Street Academy. And the students were blown away by the work and were, the teacher was really interested in having the Diatribe come out and talk to young people. And shortly after the exhibit, I was inducted. I was the first woman at the time, first non-male who was inducted into the Diatribe. I'd been in part of the community for several months and was really blown away by the passion of these guys and what they were doing, and I wanted to be a part of it. So I kept showing up, kept performing, proving my chops as a poet, and so they inducted me into their group, and that was right around the time that we started going into schools. We went into schools to do career days. It was really just about showing young people that there were other routes than college if they weren't interested in the college route, that they could pursue their passions, that writing could be used as a coping mechanism, but it also could be something that could take their voice to another level, that there are people listening, that their voice mattered. And so these teachers kept asking us to come out, and so we kept going to the school and just hanging out with the kids, but realized maybe we needed to create some curriculum. So we really started developing some lessons that were really just based in issues that we had wanted to talk about as young people that we had never been able to talk about in school. So it was really just rooted in young people being able to express themselves, talk about what was going on in their lives and in the world around them. And yeah, now 7 years later, we're in our 3rd year as a nonprofit. We're in 20 to 30 schools a year, and we work with thousands of students every year. We reach a lot through assemblies, but we also work with hundreds of kids in workshops as well. So we help them to write their own stories and to share their stories, whether for their community or for their school and their peers.
That's amazing. Congratulations on that growth. That's incredible.
Thank
20
you.
to 30 schools a year. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And I mean, I kind of feel like I fell backwards into it. And as an organization, we kind of fell backwards into it. But it's really been a beautiful thing to see something that is personal as an artist and sometimes can be ego driven, something that I struggle with as an artist, as a poet. But to see how then you can take that platform and give voice to others. And I think that's really what the heart of it is being able to share that platform and show young people that their voice matters, that their story matters, and that their community is listening.
Wow. I know that right before, I follow you guys on Facebook. I've been following you guys for a while. Am I correct in remembering, like, right before the pandemic hit, were you guys moving into a physical space, like your first physical space?
Yes. So we have our first ever office spaces, which it's at the Garfield Neighborhood Park Association building at Garfield Park. And so there is a space where we were planning on doing our summer programming, and then there is a small office area upstairs. And yes, we were going to start our first week there when COVID really started to change things for everybody. So that was a difficult shift since we've been working from home a lot in terms of the administrative work. And I am someone who does well with structure, does well with having a space like that. So to go back and to be working from home when I thought we were shifting, that was a little bit of a letdown. But we are in the office space now that things have opened up a little bit. There's just two of us in there, and we're able uh, to really make it our own. I actually have some painting experience, so I painted the walls with the color of our logo, and we got some really nice office furniture donated from Custer and from Steelcase, and it's a really nice space, and we're really excited to be working out of it now.
Oh, congratulations. I'm glad that it's, yeah, I mean, it feels like it was just yesterday that everything happened, but I guess it
Right?
was March and here we are like 3 months later.
Yeah, it's
Um,
crazy.
so I'm really curious about how you, I'm curious about meaningful moments that you've had within your work with the diatribe. I know that I've seen a few performances that you guys have done at like events, and it seems to be the work that you guys do, whatever curriculum you have, really seems to resonate with the kids that are participating. I mean, I've seen kids like just come up to the mic and just tell these really raw stories through their spoken word, and it's really moving. And so I'm curious about meaningful moments you've had, and I'm also curious about how your work with the diatribe impacts you as a poet and your output.
Absolutely. We've had so many amazing moments, whether just in classrooms, and this is something we say often because we hear it often, but teachers, pulling us aside after a session and telling us this young person, never talked in class before, and they're suddenly sharing their history, their stories, what's going on in their home lives with their whole class. So those moments happen a lot, where we see young people really open up and are able to be vulnerable with one another. Moments where students come out to their classmates as members of the LGBTQ community. One instance stands out when we were in a middle school, and a young person stood up and ended up sharing that he was experiencing sexual abuse from an uncle, and all of the students just gathered around him and hugged him. And it was this moment that, it was this really emotional, difficult moments that are painstaking in a lot of ways, but also you see that unity and the idea that maybe this young man would have never felt like he had the opportunity to share that, and maybe there was some freedom in that, and that the teachers then were able to know and to step in and to be able to correct that home life situation. So there have been some really powerful moments like that. And then also seeing those students blossom on stage. We were at Southwest Community Campus this past fall, and this one young person, Erin Howard, was reading, and we'd heard from her mom that she was up all night memorizing and practicing for her mom and in her bedroom and just like going over it and over it. And she stepped up to the microphone, and she had her notebook in her hand, and she read the first line, and then she just threw her notebook down and did it from memorization. And
That's so
it
cool.
was so powerful. It was a poem about gentrification. And that's something that we teach often in schools, is about what's happening right here in Grand Rapids, what is happening with Black and brown folks being pushed out of their homes and being displaced, being pushed out of their neighborhoods. So she was a young person that actually remembers what Wealthy Street used to be like.
Oh, wow.
And that
Okay.
was what her poem was about. And she just really went in, and there are so many times where we have goosebumps. And sometimes we wonder if some of the subject matter is over, this was middle school aged kids. So we wonder, like, is this gonna really latch on? Are they gonna understand these concepts that we're talking about? And we really realize that they're ready to talk about it. And if you give them the language to talk about it, then that's what's empowering. So
Wow.
it was really cool.
That's amazing. That just gave me chills. Everything that you just described, that's incredible. So you are, Rachel, you are more one of the more visible members of West Michigan's LGBTQ community because of your position with the diatribe, and as your work there has grown. And as we know, most of us know, we're getting a little further away from it, but West Michigan has really strong conservative roots. And I know that the life experience here for an LGBTQ person might be a little different than someone in a city of the same size somewhere else in the country. Before we get into all that, can you tell me about your journey to coming out and to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in West Michigan. I grew up in Hudsonville, attending a very small church that was a really controlling environment. It was a very intense church with a lot of performative worship and a lot of pressure put on us as young people, as children. So at age 10, my Sunday school teacher was praying for me up at an altar call, and just kept saying not in English over and over again. And I realized she wanted me to speak in tongues. I remember when I was 13, there was another revival type service where there was a special speaker from South Africa, and a lot of people were like laughing and struck by this like spirit of laughter. But I noticed my father was, not really laughing, and what kind of developed was the pastors of my church and the deacons began trying to exorcise him of the demon of homosexuality. And that was something that I knew what was happening, because I knew my dad was pretty open with us in terms of things that he saw as struggles. And I knew that some of the other people in the church probably knew as well, but that was something that like shaped obviously the way that I viewed queer people. And also kind of deep down in those moments, I feel like I had this ringing sense of dread a lot of times, of kind of knowing but not fully knowing. But I remember in that moment kind of a recognition of, am I going to have to go through this too? Are people going to know, this is my demon too? And instances like that, and just things that were said from the pulpit and things that were said at home that really led me to believe that being gay was one of the worst things you could be, through the Christian lens. And how much shame, like there was just a lot of shame and a lot of pressure. And so I think even aside from just like the Christian landscape, being in that specific environment was really difficult. And I really was a people pleaser. And once I figured out what they wanted from me, the people of the church, I really was able to perform, and I was able to end up being this like leader among the young people. But that really meant, as I got further into my teen years, realizing what was at stake, and realizing just kind of this fear of being found out, being found out as a fraud or a fake, as queer, just kind of waiting for that axe to fall. And that was really difficult. I struggled with my mental health a lot. I struggled with self-harm for a long time. And it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I had a crush on someone that I really let myself acknowledge it, and let myself realize that if that's what being gay was, and then um even if I couldn't be with that person, I had a boyfriend, that I should come out for myself. It didn't necessarily have to be in order to be with someone, but that someone else would probably come along. So I knew I had to leave the church. I knew I had to be honest with myself, because that was important to me, that integrity. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to fake my way through it anymore. And I knew that the church wouldn't accept me anymore. And so it really was a huge loss. So I lost all of my friends when I came out. The church was also known for, many young people left when they got to a certain age, just because it was so controlling. And you weren't allowed to talk to them anymore. So I knew that I was giving up the community that raised me. I knew I would still have relationships with family. I was the last of my siblings to leave the church, and my dad had already left, but I knew that that was going to really crush my mom. And when I did tell her, she sobbed in my lap, because she had kind of already convinced me to go to counseling to pray the gay away, and I had agreed to that at that point. But when I told her I was no longer going to do that, that was a real breaking point in our relationship. And it still is difficult, but yeah, that definitely, in that specific environment, was difficult. And I know that a lot of people, even if they didn't grow up in the same extreme kind of church that I did, that they've had great loss, the loss of faith and the loss of that identity as a person of faith. That was my whole life. That was who I was. And so then who I was kind of shifted, and my identity was then rooted in being this prodigal, being this rebel against that. And so I think that definitely fueled who I am as an artist, and who I started to become in the queer community. I came out with a bang, I guess, as you say, and I really wanted my voice to be heard, because for so long, I didn't feel like I was able to truly speak as myself. And that's why it's important for me now to also pass that mic to others, and to
Mhm.
give them that opportunity to be unapologetically themselves, and to be seen and heard for who they are, and celebrated for who they are. Because so many of us in the queer community, and in the Black community right now, we're seeing that as well, that um, it shouldn't just be about these lives mattering. These lives should be celebrated and uplifted.
Yeah, that was really well put. I think it's, as a straight person, like, what it would feel like what was really resonating with me as you were describing your journey is like, you knew you were gonna lose a lot,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, your whole life. And I don't think many of us can empathize with that feeling of like, you know, losing all of those things, which aren't even just things. Those are like those are your roots. Those are like, it's your heart and your soul. Your family and how you grew up. To to be yourself. And and this is going to sound kind of odd, or perhaps superficial, but I'm a huge fan of Queer Eye. And in the first season, there is a moment where a young man comes out to his stepmom, and he is absolutely sobbing and just comes apart at the seams, and it's so vulnerable. And I remember I watched it like over and over and over again, because I was like, oh, it truly impressed upon me that is not a moment I'm going to experience in my life. And how pivotal it is for so many people in the LGBTQ community. And it was just very valuable for me as a straight person. It was just like a little bit of an awakening of like, oh my God, like that, you know, I'm never going to have that moment of that extreme vulnerability and say like, here, you can take me or leave me. I hope you take me, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So that's a lot. That's really intense. And so so as you're describing that, so what about it, like you said, you knew you were going to come out, it wasn't to be with somebody, it was for yourself. um Although you had all this on the line, what was it about, can you describe like what was it about coming out that you were like, no, yes, this is worth it, this is worth everything I stand to lose?
It was the hope for finding love and companionship, and the feeling the feelings that I had for this person. Um, I was like, this can't be wrong. Um, this is love. This is something that's beautiful. And if other people can't see that, like, I don't want to live a life where I'm surrounded by people who not only can't accept, but can't celebrate that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so really it was about the hope of finding love, and also rejecting the condemnation. It was recognizing how much was wrong with what I had been taught. I was taught so much judgment, and like, I didn't see God in many things. God was this very small thing, even though we're being told, God is everywhere, God is omniscient, God is love. There were so many contradicting messages that were really showing me, you can only find God in this one place. You can only worship in this one specific way. You can only show your devotion to God by living this one specific way. When really, I would say I'm agnostic now, but I see God in so many more places now. I see God in all different forms of love. I see God in struggle. I see God in things that were seen as ugly or as, condemned. I don't think that it's anyone's job to judge. So part of it was for the hope of love, but also was to reject a way of life that I didn't see as any kind of love, of godliness, if that was, how God was being defined.
Wow. Can you tell me about how your art has influenced your experience as a member of the LGBTQ community here in West Michigan?
Yeah, I think that in a way that is, it's where I found a home. I think for a long time, even in college, I felt kind of rootless and, um, kind of struggling to recreate that kind of home community experience. And so my art was a way to kind of express myself and to talk about those things. And then when I found the poetry community here, and found other queer people, because I was out for a long time and didn't have any queer friends. I
Oh,
was very afraid of having, like, at the time, what I would call a lesbian circle, because it was like everybody was dating everybody and it seemed catty and it seemed exclusive and it seemed like my little baby queer heart wouldn't be able to take it. And I just didn't really know that many people. It wasn't until I started going to the Drunken Retort and started doing poetry, that really, I feel like, the people, I started making connections with other queer people through talking about being queer, and that's really what opened up my queer world, um, and started to kind of create that home and that sense of community. So it definitely impacted that, and now I feel very fortunate and very privileged, to be where I am, and to have the people around me that I have around me.
wow, that's amazing. That really is. Can you tell me what, as we're recording this and as we'll publish this during Pride Month, what
Mhm.
does Pride Month mean to you?
Pride Month, I think, normally means to me a letting loose, a letting down of the guard, a celebration. This year is a little bit different. This year, I have not made any pride posts. And I still am kind of formulating what I want to say, because a lot of times I am vocal on social media and things like that. But um, pride is an uprising, and that's what we're seeing around the world right now. And it was our Black trans family members in the queer community that paved the way for us at Stonewall, that said enough is enough. And so now this year, Pride, I see as an opportunity to give back. So it's about, and I would quote, Marcel Price, my business partner with the Diatribe, who was talking about, Black Lives Matter. And a lot of times we want to be specific about what Black lives matter, which ones matter, and all Black lives matter. And so that does mean Black trans folks, but that means Black folks that maybe I don't have the same ideals as. And so I want to be out there, supporting that uprising and that protest and that movement, because as someone who wants to be an ally there, like, I recognize how important those voices were and those actions were to our movement. And so I really see Pride this year, um, as part of that. And I think that we can still celebrate. We can still celebrate, every member of the LGBTQ community, but it should be especially focused on the Black members of the LGBTQ community and the intersection there.
Yeah, yeah, that was really beautifully said. Yeah, the timing of everything seems to be, it's somewhat serendipitous in that regard of really calling attention to um, that part of the LGBTQ community, which, as you said, intersectionality, that word that you used. I think oftentimes we can forget that, or we can forget that. Oh yeah, it's not just everyone that you agree with; it's people that you might venomously disagree with, and standing up for their lives too. And that's a really good reminder for everybody.
Absolutely. And if one of us is not free, then none of us are. And I think that, um, transcends all of those boundaries.
For sure, for sure. What would you like to see in West Michigan as an LGBTQ plus person, as as West Michigan continues to, well, specifically Grand Rapids, it's enjoyed quite a lot of development in the past few years. I've grown up here, so I've really gotten to see, like,
Mhm.
the skyline change, and a lot of neighborhoods change. However, there's neighborhoods that are continue to be left behind in that development. So but as we become more of a culturally aware place,
Mhm.
what would you like to see for West Michigan?
Yeah, I would like to see, spaces that are not just bars. I would like to see, we used to have Discussions, which was a gay coffee shop. It was the first queer space I ever
Oh my
went to
God,
as a young person.
I remember that
Um,
place. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I would love to see that. I would love to see that for young people. And someone who now, I haven't drank all of 2020. What a year to stop drinking.
right.
Um,
But yes, holy
but
cow.
yeah, spaces that don't revolve around alcohol, and spaces that are all inclusive. Because right now we have one club, Rumors, and we have, one gay bar, the Apartment Lounge, and it's just not enough. I want to see
Yeah.
more. I want to see more spaces for a wider range of people. I want people to feel comfortable downtown.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to see more of that intersectionality and more of that safe space that we create for each other. I want to see, more shows in queer theater, queer burlesque, queer, all just different forms of expression, and arts coming together in a space like that. And I want to see, eventually, having a boys town like is in Chicago, or a space where people can have like neighborhoods and all of that together. And I know that feels far away, or that feels difficult, but I think it really does start with having conversations, and also, like you said, recognizing the neighborhoods that are getting left behind and the way that development in our city is displacing folks, and kind of addressing that as well, and realizing, okay, we have Art Prize, we have these supposed events that elevate artists, but are we really elevating artists, or are we exploiting them? And how can we especially uplift without exploiting Black voices and queer voices and voices in those intersections?
Yeah, I think the younger generation that's coming up in leadership in Grand Rapids really inspires me, and I think that we can create a city that looks like exactly what you described. And I was talking to your very good friend Erin Becca Pope a few weeks ago, and we were just discussing their experience as a queer person in Grand Rapids. And one of the things that they brought up was like, one of the pitfalls of not having like a neighborhood is that there's these satellite groups of LGBTQ plus community members who are active in like one space, like the art space or the activist space or the theater space. And there's not really just a place for people who are not necessarily participating in those things to feel proud of their identity, or to feel not companionship, but connection with other people that might have their life experience. So and until we had that discussion, I hadn't thought. I've always thought like, man, it'd be really fun to have like a gay neighborhood in Grand Rapids. But when they explained to me like, and then there's also this people really actually can suffer from it, and their life experience can suffer from it.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you think about the fact that a lot of queer folks don't have supportive family, and some of them have experienced homelessness because of it. And so like the idea of having a community and a space and neighbors that you feel comfortable with, that you can create those more of those familial connections, it makes everybody safer.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to be so gracious and candid about sharing your experience. I've been really inspired by 18-year-old Rachel just like coming out, as you said, with a bang. That's pretty amazing when everything else in your life told you otherwise. What a brave thing.
Well, thank you, Elise. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to come on and speak with you.
So before we go, is there how can people support the Diatribe or keep up with the work that you guys are doing?
Absolutely. You can visit www.thediatribe.org to go to our website. You can support the organization that way, through donations and things like that. You can keep up on what we're doing. You can sign up for our newsletter, which is another way to be invited to community events if you want to see some young people performing. We're also on Facebook, The Diatribe Inc. You can follow us there. We're also on Instagram, _ The Diatribe. We're out there.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you, Elise.
To stay in touch with us, please visit www.womenslifestyle.com and sign up for our newsletter. You can also listen to this podcast on YouTube. Our YouTube channel is Women's Lifestyle, all one word. If you have any ideas for a podcast episode, or if you'd like to hear from someone we haven't interviewed yet, please reach out to me at elyse@womenslifestyle.com. That's Elise at womenslifestyle.com. I hope you are all staying healthy and staying safe, and thank you so much for listening.